Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Sea Oak, a short story written by George Saunders. I have to say right off the bat, this story is so bleak and depressing and disturbing. I had to read it when I was a freshman in college. It's just one of those stories that stuck with me all these years. I don't even know what made me think of it again, but I figured to discuss it on this podcast. And you could actually find this online. Just type in Sea Oak, George Saunders. You can read it online. I recommend it. It is a good story. It's well written, but it's a sad one. So it's told in the point of view of a male stripper, and he doesn't even have a name. He's not given a name. He also rarely speaks in this story. But he has a really, really crappy life. He lives with his sister Min and their cousin Jade, and they each have a little boy. No mention of any significant others, so I guess the kids' fathers aren't in the picture at all. And they live in this rundown town called Sea Oak. And they live with their Aunt Bernie, who's just very appreciative, this kind old woman, not even that old, honestly, she's 60, but she's this kind lady, and she's still grateful for everything, despite the fact that their house is crap, to put it simply, and they live in a dangerous town. The girls are not intelligent at all. They just watch their kids all day. They watch, garbage TV shows. They watch stuff like How My Child Died Violently, and all these depressing things. But Bernie is a good woman, and she's the peacemaker. And as our narrator says, our nameless narrator, he says, Aunt Bernie's a peacemaker. She doesn't like trouble. Once the sky backed over her foot at Food King, and she walked home with 10 broken bones. She never got married, because Grandpa needed her to keep house after Grandma died. Then he died and left all his money to a woman none of us had ever heard of. And Aunt Bernie started in at Drug Town. But she's not bitter. Sometimes she's so not bitter, it gets on my nerves. When I say Sea Oak's a pit, she says she's just glad to have a roof over her head. When I say I'm tired of being broke, she says Grandpa once gave her pencils for Christmas, and she was so thrilled she sat around sketching horses all day on the backs of used envelopes. Once I asked her was she sorry she never had kids, and she said no, not at all. And besides, weren't we her kids? And I said yes, we were, but of course we're not. For dinner it's beanie weenies. For dessert it's ice cream with freezer burn. What a nice day we've had, Aunt Bernie says once we've got the babies in bed. Man, what an optometrist, says Jade. Poor dumb Jade. Doesn't know the word optimist. Oh gosh. So before the home life, though, we learn about the narrator's job. He's a male stripper. And the opening line is, welcome to joysticks. He has to strip, and he just does what he's told. He serves them their food, and they tell him to bend over. He bends over because he's got no choice. He's like, well, this is my job. I gotta make money. Then the next day, the narrator hears a shot, and he rushes home, and then the sister and cousin are freaking out because, there were gunshots, and thankfully no one was hurt, but one of the two babies are named Troy and Mac. Troy, his walker got hit, and in the story it says, Troy's walker got hit. Luckily he wasn't in it. It's supposed to look like a duck, but now the beak's missing. And then a few paragraphs down, I go out and find the beak of Troy's duck and fix it with Elmer's. Wow, that says so much about this poor, literally poor family. They have nothing. And then Aunt Bernie says, actually, you know what? I think that looks even more like a real duck now, because sometimes their beaks are cracked. I seen one like that downtown. And then Min says, oh my god, the kid's duck gets shot in the face, and she says we're lucky. Well, we are lucky, says Bernie. Somebody's beak is cracked, says Jade. You know what I do if something bad happens, Bernie says? I don't think about it. Don't take it so serious. It ain't the end of the world. That's what I do. That's what I always done. That's how I got where I am. My feeling is, Bernie, I love you, but where are you? You work at Drugtown for minimum. You're 60 and own nothing. You were basically a slave to your father and never had a date in your life. I mean, complain if you want, she says, but I think we're doing pretty darn good for ourselves. Oh, we're doing great, says Min, and pulls Troy out from behind the couch and brushes some duck shards off his sleeper. Wow, I mean, it's nice that Bernie's an optimist, but yeah, it's just so blatantly horrible, their situation, their life, and yet they're stuck in this life because the girls aren't educated, and same with the male narrator. They have nothing. Min's and the narrator's dad had died, and then their mom is living with her boyfriend her boyfriend Freddie. And then, so Aunt Bernie, that's her sister, and they all live together, but poor Aunt Bernie got nothing with her life. And then, unfortunately, in the next scene, poor Aunt Bernie passes away. The narrator comes home to see Aunt Bernie sitting on the couch, and apparently she was scared to death, literally scared to death. An intruder came in, scared her. She died right there on the couch, and he just stole everything and leaves. Like, oh my God, what a way to die. What a terrible situation. Getting freaking mugged. That's the end of her sad life. It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Toward the end of that scene, as in the narrator says, we call Ma and Freddie. We get their machine. Ma, pick up, says Min. Something bad happened. Ma, please freaking pick up. But nobody picks up. So we leave a message. Like, oh my God. So sad. So horrifying, really. And then they're planning her funeral, and they can't afford much, and they were like talking about what kind of casket to get her. And then based on their budget, it's like, well, this one's all we can get. That's cardboard. Like, it's that much of a piece of junk that they got to get her cardboard. But they're like, no freaking way. Work your whole life and end up in a Mayflower box? I doubt it. We've got zip in savings. We sit at a desk and Lobton does what he calls a credit calc. If we pay it out monthly for 7 years, we can afford the Amber Mist, which includes a double thick balsa box and 2 coats of lacquer and a 1-year wake. But 7 years, geez, says Ma. We got to get her the good one. She never had anything nice in her life. So Amber Mist it is. And then they bury her, and they're at lunch with the mom and the boyfriend. And they're asking, like, well, what are you guys going to do now? And they're just going to keep living in Sea Oak. They can't move in with the mom and Freddie because the landlord wouldn't like it. And then they're just talking about Aunt Bernie, saying she was a great lady, but she didn't have anything in her life. Like, she didn't do anything with her life, really. And then they talk about their options, saying, well, maybe one of you could work, one of you could babysit. They each say, Jade and Min, I don't see why I should have to work so she can stay home and with her baby. So they each say that. Neither one is, like, willing to actually make their lives better, but instead they'll just sit at home and watch their own kids instead of going out and getting jobs. And then Freddie, the mom's boyfriend, goes on to say, let me tell you something about this country. Anybody can do anything, but first they gotta try. So he does this whole rant, and then Jade just says, like, you live in a mansion. I do not claim to live in no mansion, says Freddie, but then again, I do not live in no slum. The other thing I do not do is strip naked. And then Jade says, he's never actually naked. And then the narrator tells us, which is true, I always have on at least a tea bag. So then Freddie says, no wonder we never take these kids out to a nice lunch. And Min says, I do not even consider this a nice lunch. Oh, God. I'm sitting here, basically my commentary so far of this story is, oh God, this is terrible. These people, their lives suck. These poor people. And yet, they gotta make the changes if they want to get out of this crappy life. So the next night, Jade and Min and the narrator, they're just at home, and it's like their first night without Bernie. The narrator says, "For dinner, Jade microwaves some stars and flags. They're addictive. They put sugar in the sauce and sugar in the meat nuggets. I think also caffeine. Someone told me the brown streaks in the flags are caffeine. We have like 5 bowls each." And then they're watching a show called The Worst That Could Happen, a half hour of computer simulations of tragedies that have never actually occurred but theoretically could. I guess, like, with these horrible shows they're watching, it makes them feel better about their own terrible lives. That's possible. Like, they think, well, our lives aren't this bad, at least. But then they get a phone call, and they find out that apparently someone has defaced Bernie's grave. And they go over to the cemetery and they look, and there's just a hole now instead of a patch of grass, and the casket's open and Bernie's body is missing. And so one of the cops thinks that a teenager like stole the body and like would put it somewhere for like their own amusement. And the cop says, typically it's teens. Typically we find a loved one nearby. Once we found the loved one nearby with, a cigarette between its lips, wearing a sombrero. These kids today got a lot more nerve than we ever did. I never would have dreamed of digging up a dead corpse when I was a teen. You might tip over a stone, sure. You might spray paint something on a crypt. You might, give a wino a hot foot. Like, really? You might do that? Well, that's this town, I guess. And then Freddy says, but this is an entirely different... Oh, wait, sorry, he says, this is a entirely different ball game. Boy, howdy, says the cop. And we all look down at the shoes in Ma's hand. She's holding Bernie's shoes. And it's so sad. So then he goes to work, but he's depressed. And his boss sends him home because he's not doing what the ladies ask. They want him to bend over, and this time he doesn't bend over for the $1. So he goes home after Min calls him and tells him to come straight home. So he comes home and he finds... Oh, by the way, the first thing he says in this story, so before he goes home, he says to his boss, we really need the money. It's the first thing he says in this story. And then the boss says, is that my problem? Am I supposed to let you dance without vigor just because you need the money? And he tells him to come back when he's feeling better. And then when Min says to come home, he says, what is it? She says, just come straight home. So he goes home. He says, maybe someone's found the body. I imagine Bernie naked, Bernie chopped in two, Bernie posed on a bus bench. All these graphic things. And he goes on to say, I hope and pray that something only mildly bad's been done to her, something we can live with. At home the door's wide open. Min and Jade are sitting very still on the couch, babies in their laps, staring at the rocking chair, and in the rocking chair is Bernie's body. Same perm, same glasses, same blue dress we buried her in. What's it doing here? Who would be so cruel? And what are we supposed to do with that? Then she turns her head and looks at me, and she tells him to sit down, but she uses a swear, and he says she never swore in her life. She tells him that he's gonna, show his junk, basically, but she uses a crass word. There's a lot of dirty language in this story. So now Bernie, this is her corpse back to life. And she's angry, and she's no longer the kind lady who's grateful and the peacemaker that she once was. Now she's angry. She wants things in life that she never had. So she goes on this rant. She tells the narrator that he's going to start stripping naked and showing women his junk. She tells Jade she's going to get a job. She's going to work, and she says this is all part of a plan. That's part 1 of phase 1. And she says Min's going to babysit. She's going to quit smoking. And then she says they're going to grow up and maybe have more than I ever had, because she laments things she never had. She died a virgin. She didn't have a good life. She didn't have anything. All she had was work. After her whole rant, she has to be covered up. And The narrator says, "We nod. I go for a blanket. Her hands and feet are shaking and she's grinding her teeth and one falls out. So she starts falling apart more and more. And she says, well, I've got all this strength now. She says, see how strong I am? She shouts around midnight and there's a cracking sound. And when I go out, the door has been torn off the microwave, but she's still sitting in the chair. So he goes to work and he thinks, okay, I'm going to do what Aunt Bernie told me to do. But then he sees that a girl he's supposed to strip for is a girl he dated his senior year. And he thinks to himself, no way may hang around here so Angela can see me in my flight jacket and tea bags and wonder to herself how I was so wrong, etc., etc. I hide in the kitchen until my shift is done, then walk home very, very slowly because I'm afraid of what Bernie's going to do when I get there. And then he gets home and Min's crying and she says, I can't take any more of this. She's like falling apart. Plus she made me bake a freaking pie. Like that's the worst thing. So Bernie is literally disintegrating. Bernie's body, whatever you want to call it, but it is Bernie back from the dead. Her arms falling off, her ears falling off. And she's asking them, like, what's wrong? Why are you guys complaining? She basically berates them because they're lazy good-for-nothings, as she thinks of it. She says, you don't know nothing. What fun is life when you don't know nothing? So she berates Min for being dumb. She calls them ungrateful because she tries to try on some of Min's bras, and she says, I never had a nice, sexy bra. So she's regretting, like, all these things she never did in life. And then later Min says, Bernie, God, Min says, and starts to cry. You used to be so nice. I'm still so nice, says Bernie, and bites into a sub and takes off the tip of her finger and starts chewing it up. What a disturbing image. Oh my gosh. Ooh. But that's an interesting line because she's being nice in a really messed up way, but she's being nice in the sense that she doesn't want them to have crappy lives like she had. She thinks they're still young enough they can turn their lives around. And she lets them know, like, she can see all these bad things that could happen if they don't change. And she mentions something about how one of the boys, Troy, he's gonna, like, get his leg all twisted. And she says, it's a freaking prophecy. You know, that word means prediction. She's warning them of bad things that could happen if they don't make changes. But then the next day, she says she's not feeling well. And Bernie's really she's a pile of parts now. So she doesn't have much time left. So the narrator walks in and he says, the TV's broke and the refrigerator's tipped over and Bernie's parts are strewn across the living room like she's been shot out of a cannon. She tried to get up, says Jade. I don't know where the hell she thought she was going, says Min. So she tells the narrator to come here, and he squats down in front of her and she says, that's it for me, as per usual. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Although, come to think of it, I was never even the freaking bridesmaid. She tells him again to show his junk. She says, it's what you got, and remember, Troy in September on his trike, one leg twisted, don't forget. And also, don't remember me like this. Remember me like how I was that night we all went to Red Lobster and I had that new perm. Ah, Christ, at least buy me a stone. I rub her shoulder, which is next to her foot. We loved you, I say. Why do some people get everything and I got nothing, she says. Why? Why was that? I don't know, I say. So then after she dies again, he cleans up everything, and he thinks to himself, I smooth over the dirt and say a quick prayer. If it was wrong for her to come back, forgive her. She never got beans in this life. Plus she was trying to help us. At the car I think of an additional prayer. But please don't let her come back again. So very twisted, morbid humor in this story peppered in with all, like, the really dark and depressing stuff. And it's an important message to live life to the fullest and don't have any regrets. It's just told in a very extreme way with, like, this body coming back to life and being, like, so crass and yet still helpful, but just really intense. So then at the end, he's making more of an effort at work, and he's basically, like, sleeping with women to get money, but he's doing what he has to do to get out of his crappy life and to make a better life for himself and for his sister and his cousin. And then he tells himself, for every $100 I make, I set aside 5 for Bernie's headstone. What do you write on something like that? Life passed her by, died disappointed, came back to life but fell apart. All true but too sad, and no way I'm writing any of those. Bernie Kowalski, it's going to say, beloved aunt. Sometimes she comes to me in dreams. She never looks good. Sometimes she's wearing a dirty smock. Once she had on handcuffs. But every time it's the same thing. Some people get everything and I got nothing, she says. Why? Why did that happen? Every time I say I don't know. And I don't. So, it's a sad story. But an important message underneath it all. Definitely give it a read. It's worth a read. It's just very disturbing and dark. But with that being said, that's going to conclude this episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving a message in the contact section at storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Also, if you like what you hear, be sure to give the podcast a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Shout out to Mary Bradley. Thank you so much for your review. I really appreciate it. Next week, I'll be doing something a little different. I'm going to be sharing some writing tips. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.